Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to learn about network security groups in Azure. In short, they're called NSGs. So let's find out what is an NSG. A network security group are network rules in Azure that controls or filter inbound and outbound traffic to Azure resources. Now, as you can see from the diagram here, we've got a virtual network and then we've got a subnet. And within that subnet, we have two virtual machines. There's a network security group attached to this subnet. We've got a user. So as per the diagram, the inbound connectivity to virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2 is controlled by the NSG. Port 80 is allowed on virtual machine 1. Port 3389 is denied on virtual machine 1, which means the user can make inbound connections on port 80, which is HTTP, but if the user tries to access this virtual machine using port 3389 using RDP protocol, the user will be denied. And for the virtual machine 2, the rules have been reversed. Port 80 has been blocked or denied, but the user will be able to access virtual machine 2 using port 3389. Now, why do you want to use NSGs? The main reason for using NSGs is to protect your virtual machines from unauthorized or unwanted access. You can control traffic using granular conditions. It is very easy to configure. We will find out how to create an NSG group and assign it to a subnet and then allow RDP using our demo towards the end of this tutorial, so stick around for the demo. And it's free to use, so you don't have to pay extra for using NSG rules. Now, there are a few components when you're creating NSG rules. Number one is priority. The lower the number, the higher the priority. So let's say, for example, that you've got a rule with priority number 300 that allows RDP, and then you've got another rule with priority number 500 that denies RDP to a virtual machine. The rule with priority 300 will take precedence, so you will be able to access that particular virtual machine using RDP. So the lower the number, the higher the priority. Now, the direction, you have to specify the direction, of course, when you're creating an NSG rule. So whether it's inbound or outbound, you have to confirm the protocol, TCP or UDP, port number, source and destination, and the action, whether you're allowing the action or denying the action. One thing to remember is this is stateful connectivity, so which means that let's say you created an inbound connection on port 80, the response from the server back to the user is accepted automatically, so you do not have to create both inbound and outbound rules manually. As long as there's an inbound rule for that specific traffic type, the response traffic is authorized automatically, so the two-way communication happens seamlessly. Now, NSG works in this manner. So this is basically the workflow from the moment that traffic hits your NSG rule. So it checks for the rules, as I mentioned earlier, lowest to highest priority. The first match wins, so it starts processing the rules from the top and goes down. Lowest number gets the highest priority, and if it matches, then it stops processing the rules and does whatever that rule says, whether it's allowing traffic or blocking or denying traffic. Now, you need to, in some cases, you may need to allow or deny traffic on the virtual machine's operating system level as well. As you know, the Windows operating systems as well as Linux, they've got their firewalls built into the operating system. So sometimes you only need to make changes in the NSG rules for allowing and denying traffic. Sometimes you may need to also, in addition to the NSG rule, have to make changes on the firewall at the operating system level on the virtual machine, within the virtual machine. Now, if there is no match, default rules apply. These are the default rules in Azure as far as Azure networking goes. Whether you assign a network security group or not, these are basically the rules. So your inbound connectivity is blocked by default. From outside, only within the VNet inbound connectivity is allowed, and within the Azure load balancers. And as far as outbound goes, outbound is allowed within the VNet, and outbound internet is also allowed by default. Now, you cannot delete these default rules, but you can add higher priority rules to change the default rules. For example, let's say that you want to block outbound internet connectivity from a specific subnet or a virtual machine, or a specific virtual machine. You can simply create an additional rule in the outbound port rule section, blocking the outbound internet connectivity. Now, these are the NSG best practices. So always use least privilege principle. What I mean by this is only allow inbound, especially when you're talking about inbound traffic, only allowed what's required, and always remember to restrict the source IPs to the IPs that you trust. Unless you're operating a public facing website in Azure, that's the only case where you can set the source IPs to any, but other than that, always restrict your inbound connectivity based on the requirements, based on your trusted IPs, so it is more secure. Now, applying NSGs, there are two ways that you can apply NSGs. I will show this in practice in a little while. The recommended method is to apply an NSG at the subnet level, so you have one NSG per subnet, and the same NSG can be applied to multiple subnets as well. So you can just manage the rules within that NSG. There is another way that you can apply an NSG to a network interface card of an individual virtual machine, but if you do that, then you will have to manage the rules at the subnet level if you've got a subnet NSG, and at the NIC level of the virtual machine. So it will double up the work, and especially if you've got multiple virtual machines, scaling can become a problem, documentation can become a problem, troubleshooting can become a problem. So it is highly recommended that you use NSGs at the subnet level, but for testing purposes, if you've got one or two virtual machines in your production environment, it doesn't really matter. You can just simply attach the NSG to the network interface card of the virtual machine, which is what Azure tells you to do if you are creating your virtual machines from scratch on Azure portal. Once again, I'll show that to you during our demonstration. Now, always document your rules. Whenever you make a change, come back to the document and update your documentation, so it is easy for somebody to understand by reading the documentation. Now, you can enable virtual network flow logs as well to monitor the NSG traffic if you want to further troubleshoot for advanced troubleshooting. If you can't figure out what's going on, if the network connectivity is not working as expected, you can use network flow logs to further troubleshoot. This is optional, but if you think that you're gonna need some advanced troubleshooting options, it is something that you need to consider, but once again, it is optional. Now, one other thing to remember is to keep the naming consistent when you're creating NSG rules, and keep them meaningful. So for anyone who's reading the rules, just by taking a look at it, they know what it means. Now that we have a basic understanding of how NSGs work and their purpose, let's go to our Azure portal and see everything in action. Okay, so first of all, let me show you how the NSG option is presented to you by default when you're creating a virtual machine from scratch. I'm not going to go ahead and create a virtual machine in here. I already have one running for our testing purposes, but let me just show you. If I take you to the networking tab, this is where you will specify your network security group or NSG requirements. Now, by default, a basic NSG gets attached to the network interface card of the virtual machine. Obviously, you will need to select or create a virtual network and select the appropriate subnet. But if you have multiple virtual machines and you have a complex environment, it is recommended that you select none in here, and you control traffic to this particular virtual machine by the NSG group attached at the subnet level. So I just wanted to point that out to you in the beginning. Now let me just take you back to our existing virtual machine. I'm just gonna get out from here. So this is the virtual machine that I have set up for our testing purposes. Let me just get in there. I will minimize that window. Now in here under networking tab, if you click on network settings, scroll down, as I mentioned earlier, you will see in here, so the network security group test VM NSG attached to the network interface. Now if this was attached to the subnet, it will tell here that the NSG is attached to the subnet. Because this is just a test environment and I'm only creating one virtual machine for this testing purposes, I've just created it like this. But later on I will show you how to just simply unassign this network security group from the network interface card of this virtual machine and create a new network security group and apply it at the subnet level. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the default rules that gets created or come with every network security group. These are basically the rules of Azure networking within Azure. Now let's say that I want to enable RDP access to this virtual machine. I click on create port rule, click on inbound because this is inbound connectivity. So let me just go and create inbound. Now in here I mentioned to you earlier, it is not advisable to leave the source as any, especially when you're enabling inbound connectivity to your virtual machine. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to IP addresses and change the source to my home IP address. Now the source port ranges, we can leave it as it is. If you provide an asterisk, that means you are allowing traffic on any port. So I'm just going to leave the asterisk mark to confirm the existing setting. Now because this is just one virtual machine and the NSG group or the network security group is attached to the network interface card of the actual virtual machine, I do not have to specify a destination in here. So I'm just going to leave the destination as any. But remember, if the network security group is attached to the subnet, make sure to specify the destination as well in here when you do that. I'll show that to you later in the video. So let me just switch it back to any. Service, I'm gonna simply select RDP. Azure gives you some of the popular services in here, but you can select custom as well if you got any specific requirements. I'm gonna select RDP, so it automatically selects the protocol and the port ranges for me as well. Now priority, it defaults to 100, so it starts from 100. So I don't want to use 100 in this case. I'm just gonna put 300 in here. And I'm just gonna go allow RDP test -VM. That sounds like a good name. So once you're happy with the settings, you just go ahead and click add. Okay, so our inbound port rule for RDP has been enabled now, so it is allowing RDP from my home IP address to this virtual machine. Let's go ahead and see if it actually works. Now something I wanted to point out at this point is this option here, connection prerequisites. You can check if it actually lets you connect prior to connecting, it's going to do all the checks and make sure that the connection is going to go through successfully. But do not trust this all the time, because it takes a while for this to update. Now, as you can see, it says port 3389 is not accessible, but this is not true. I will prove this to you. So let's just go ahead and download the RDP file. Double click on it. I'm just gonna drag this to my screen. So as you can see, it is attempting to connect. So I'm just gonna tick this option and click connect. In here, I am going to put my password and click OK. And I'm just gonna click yes. And this RDP connection is going to be successful. As you can see, I have successfully connected to our test virtual machine. Now that we have successfully enabled RDP connection to our test virtual machine, let's go ahead and create a new network security group and apply that at the subnet level. In the search bar, type NSG. And under services, you will see network security groups. So click on that. It'll show you existing network security groups here. Now, as you remember, this is the network security group attached to the network interface card of our test virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one in here. And let me just put it in our test resource group. I'm going to call this NSG default subnet. So NSG-DSN, and the region is Central India for this tutorial. I'm going to click review and create, and click create again. Okay, so our new network security group has been created. Now let's go to our new resource. As you can see, the default rules are in here. So I'm going to create a new rule, inbound rule, allowing RDP. So let's go ahead and expand these settings, and I'm going to go to inbound security rules, click add. In here, I'm going to again restrict connectivity to my home IP address. And in here, for the destination, I'm gonna restrict it to this particular virtual machine. Now imagine having multiple virtual machines within the subnet, so we want to make sure that we're adding a rule to that specific virtual machine. So instead of any, make sure to change it to IP addresses, and I am going to put the private IP address of our test virtual machine. Now service, it is going to be RDP. And let me just give it a name. I'm going to call it allow RDP to test VM. And this rule looks good, so I'm going to click add. Okay, so we have created our new inbound port rule. So let me go back to network security groups. Okay, so first of all, let's unassign our old network security group from our network card of the virtual machine. So I'm going to click on our old network security group. If you come across here under associated with, you will see any network security group. You can find out where it is associated with, whether it's attached to a subnet or whether it's attached to a network interface card or both. Now let's just go to the network interfaces, and I am going to select the network interface of our Azure virtual machine, and I'm going to disassociate this network security group from our virtual machine. And if I go back to the overview now and hit refresh, it should tell you that it is not associated with any resources in Azure. So I can even go ahead and delete this network security group. While it's deleting, let's go back to our new network security group that we have just created. Now we have already added our rule allowing inbound RDP to our test virtual machine. The next thing that we need to do is associate it with the subnet. Now as you can see, at the moment it is not associated with any resource. So I'm going to click on subnets in here and click associate. This is the only virtual network and this is the only subnet that I have in my test environment, so the details are correct. I'm going to click OK. It has been saved, so if I go back to overview and refresh, it should tell me that it is associated with one subnet. Perfect. So let's go back to our virtual machine and see how it looks from the virtual machine side. Let me just collapse this window. Under networking, we go to network settings, and there you go. The network security group NSG-DSN is attached to the default subnet. That's perfect. And we have allowed RDP inbound connectivity to this virtual machine, and let's confirm that it is working as expected. So let me just go back to connect again. I should have the previous RDP file that I downloaded, so I'm just gonna double click on that and let me put the password in, click OK, and as expected the remote desktop connection has been successful and everything is working perfectly fine. That is it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, take care and have a good day. Bye bye.